So hello everyone, and the holiday of Shavuot is coming up. So today we're going to talk about the holiday of Shavuot, the essence of Shavuot, and how it's connected to a famous Israeli dish. And the dish is called SABICH. What does Shavuot have to do with SABICH? This is what it looks like. So many of you are not familiar with SABICH. So let's first see, what is SABICH made out of?
Eggplant.
Okay, what else?
Well, pita.
Yeah, okay.
Hard-boiled eggs.
Ah, right. That's a key feature. Okay. And some potatoes, some vegetables. There's different variations of it, but these are the basic components. You put them all in a pita and voila. Oh, yeah, tahini, of course. Tahina in Hebrew, and there you go. That's the sabich. Okay. So how in the world is that connected to Shavuot? So we're going to get back to that in a second. So store that in your mind. The food, the Israeli dish called sabich, which I made this week, by the way. And my students that I shared it with liked it very much. First time in their life that they ate sabich. So biblical Shavuot. Why do we celebrate Shavuot?
10 Commandments. End of the Omer.
Okay, end of the Omer, 10 Commandments. So what's very interesting is that when we look in the Torah, the biblical Shavuot is let's read. So in Shemot, in Exodus, the first mention of a harvest holiday. No mention of giving the Torah 10 commandments. So as we see, v'chag hakatzir b'kurei ma'asecha asher tizra b'sadeh, and the feast of harvest of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field. By the way, before that is the Chag of Pesach, and after that is Chag Sukkot. So the three regalim, the three festivals, are mentioned as agricultural holidays. So you might think, oh, so there must be somewhere else in the Torah where it highlights Shavuot as the holiday of the 10 Commandments. Well, let's see. In Devarim, we have, any volunteer to read the verses from Devarim? So you guys see, right? The slide?
Yeah.
Deuteronomy. So you shall count 7 weeks.
Oh, do not.
What?
Start to count the 7 weeks when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Then you shall observe the Feast of Weeks, offering your free will contribution to God, and you shall rejoice.
So any mention of the giving of the Torah, of Mount Sinai?
Not a bit.
No, not at all. Again, the focus is on agricultural holiday. How about we go to Vayikra? Oh, what happened? In Leviticus, Parshat HaMoadot, where the Torah mentions in Parshat Emor, Shabbat, Pesach, counting of the Omer, and then right after the counting of the Omer, so we'll quickly go through this. The day after the Sabbath, which the rabbis interpret as the first day of Pesach, not the Sabbath as the day of the week, but the first Yom Tov of Pesach. So right after that, the day after, you shall count 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to Adonai. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread. In Hebrew, it's called Korban Shtei Halechem. And then there's also a social aspect. Don't forget the poor. So this whole description of Shavuot ends with a reminder: when you rejoice, when you're eating these sacrifices, when you're bringing the new grain to the Kohen in the temple, don't forget that when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger, which is very nice, which is reminds us that we have to always take care of the unfortunate. But again, there's no mention of the holiday of the giving of the Torah, that this was the monumental day when God, there was revelation and God gave the Ten Commandments. Nothing, not a single mention of that. So then that begs the question. That I'm going to bring in Rabbi Foreman, who states it very succinctly, in a very, very persuasive way. Let me share him.
In particular, we hear that Shavuot is a Chag HaKatzir, a harvest holiday. We hear it's Yom HaBikurim, a day on which first fruits are brought. In particular, it's a day on which we bring a special offering, 2 loaves of bread, the Shtei Alechem, from the new crop of wheat. And we hear about some other things. The Torah tells us that on Shavuos we should be happy. We should rejoice together with poor and dispossessed people. V'samachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, atah bincha bitecha avdecha v'amatcha. You should rejoice with God, you, your family, your servant, your maidservant, halevi asher bisharecha, the Levite, he doesn't have any land, hager, yatom v'almana, all these people, you should rejoice with them. And right after that it tells us, v'zacharta ki eved hayita b'mitzrayim. You should remember that you were slaves in Egypt, because somehow the Shavuos holiday is meant to make us remember our experience in Egypt too. But throughout all of this, the text seems to neglect to tell us what seems like the most important part, the part about commemorating the giving of the Torah at Sinai. I mean, why are we staying up all night anyway? So we're a little confused over here. It seems almost like there's a biblical Shavuos and a rabbinic Shavuos. The biblical Shavuot seems to be some kind of harvest festival, a day in which we give first fruit, we're supposed to be happy, rejoice with the less fortunate, a day to remember we were once slaves in Egypt. I mean, there's some gaps here, I guess, in how this all fits together. Exactly why we're supposed to be happy doesn't really get spelled out. Exactly how the holiday is meant to help us understand that we were once slaves doesn't really get spelled out. But basically, that's what the holiday is like. But that whole picture of Shavuos seems very different than the rabbinic Shavuos, the one that celebrates the giving of the Torah, the one we stay up all night, we read the Ten Commandments. So what happened here? Did the rabbis get it wrong somehow? Did they not bother reading the biblical description of the holiday? And what are we, regular ordinary people supposed to do with Shavuos? Are we?
Okay, so I want to ask you that question. That he asks in his video. What do you think the rabbis did here?
The rabbis saw that Jews were not farmers anymore, and so this holiday would have no meaning, and so they grafted onto it the giving of the Torah.
Okay, so Aaron suggests that we can say that they added a new meaning to it because they saw that there is the agricultural holiday does not apply anymore. That most of us are not farmers. Yes, exactly. And so what he questions, I think, like Aaron, could actually be the answer. Meanings of holidays evolve, meanings of rituals evolve over time, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. And here I want to bring back the SABICH for a second. You'll see how it's connected. So let's get back to the SABICH. What do you think is the origin of the name of SABICH? Why is it called SABICH? What we saw at the beginning of our class, that pita with the eggplant and the, what do you think? Any if you
Misubach, complicated is misubach.
Okay, so maybe from the root, a Hebrew root.
Misubach.
Okay, Hebrew root. Maybe misubach, but it's
Sabah in Arabic is a morning.
okay, so we have another idea, Arabic root. Okay, sabach, morning. Maybe they ate it in the morning and then it traveled over into the Jewish world, and because obviously Jews and Arabs mixed in the days of Palestine. And okay, so Arabic word meaning morning. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so there's even a thought. I asked my relatives, my brother in Israel, he says I think it's a abbreviation. Each letter stands for something, or one of the components. And this is even in an interesting video about this food of a Hebrew teacher. He brings up these possibilities. Let's see. There's English translations, so I'm going to show you when he talks about it. So this is a Hebrew teacher. He writes a lot of great videos called Doron.
עשה עם גבינה בולגרית. בקיצור, יש מלא 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 דברים. מאיפה הגיע השם הזה סביח? אז יש כל מיני תיאוריות, כמו למשל שסביח זה ראשי תיבות של סלט ביצה יותר חציל, או עוד תיאוריה שזה קרוב למילה סבח בערבית, שסבח בערבית
Abigail, that's your theory.
זה בוקר, והסביח זו מנה שבדרך כלל נאכלה בבוקר. שתי התיאוריות האלה הן נחמדות, אבל הן לא...
But they're wrong. They're not true. Even though most Israelis think.
I still think I'm correct.
Okay, now let's see a video.
So I just, while you were talking, I quickly looked on that great academic background of Wikipedia, and it said that it was named for the guy who had a restaurant. His name was Tzvi Halevi Tzavich, and he is the one who originated it.
Awesome, exactly. So let's see that guy, the son of the original guy. Let's see him explain that. This is where it started.
סביח נולד וגדל ברמת.
It was born and it grew up in Ramat Gan. This is like where Iraqi Jews settled in a neighborhood of Iraqi Jews in Ramat Gan.
אני גיא ששון, נשוי, אב לשלושה,
I am Guy Sasson, married, father of 3, and the owner of the original Sabich in Ramat Gan.
בעלים של הסביח המקורי, ברמת גן. רק אם תיגש לחלון, אני אקבל את הלקוח הבא. כן, בבקשה, אפשר? ואיך זה התחיל? אבא שלי, יעקב ששון וצבי חלבי.
My father, Yaakov Sasson, and his partner Tzvi Chalabi, another Iraqi Jew, both of them immigrated from
עלו
Baghdad.
מבגדד, הכירו במעברה בחירים.
They met each other in the Ma'abara, with the immigrant centers where they were housed in Khiria, and then they began a partnership of selling of selling something.
לימים החלה השותפות, הם מצאו קיוסק ברמת שקמה. זה היה
A kiosk in a
קיוסק קטן, קרוב מאוד לאותו קיוסק היה תחנת אוטובוס. תעשה קפה, סיגריות, בורקסים.
So people would say, make me coffee, make me cigarettes, bring me burekas, and they made sandwiches.
והם עשו להם כל מיני כריכים. צביקה זה השותף של אבא שלי.
Tzvika, he was the partner of my dad, and his name was Tzvi Chalabi.
צבי חלבי, סביח, הכינוי שלו.
His nickname was Sabich. It was a name from Iraq.
היה שם מעיראק.
סתם שם?
זה שם,
Yeah, just a name. It's a nickname.
כינוי, שם, כינוי. מגיע בחור שהכיר אותו. היה אומר לו,
So somebody who came and knew him said, Sabich, give me a portion.
סביח, תן לי מנה. היה מכין. זה שלידו.
So he would make it for him. The next guy next to him would see him making that sandwich in the pita and would say, oh, yeah, give me that Sabich.
היה רואה מה הוא עושה, אז היה אומר, תן לי סביח. לאט לאט זה התגלגל.
And that's how it transformed slowly into the name of the food, Sabich. And this is from the son of the original owner. So, and we ask most Israelis today, without looking at Wikipedia, as Natalie did, right? And they'll tell you, no, all these different theories that we saw. So if something 60 years ago has already evolved and has a life of its own with new meanings and abbreviations, and maybe it's from the Arabic, and maybe it's from the Hebrew, and maybe it's from this root, or maybe it's from that root, and really when you dive down into the research, you see that it's a whole different story. If that happens in something 60 years ago, then Kal v'chomer, right? And certainly it can happen to a holiday which evolved over hundreds, thousands of years. Meanings change, meanings evolve, meanings are added, and they are not necessarily the original meaning. And that's how I think that it's certainly very, very possible that the original holiday was so agricultural, had nothing to do with Matan Torah, and the rabbis came and added that meaning, seeing that it lost its appeal to most of the Israelites who are not farmers anymore. So I think it's a very plausible theory. But Rabbi Foreman does not like that theory, or he wants to add a very complicated and very interesting connection between the agricultural part and the giving of the Torah. So before we continue with his videos, okay, so I want to summarize. We saw that, hold on. We saw that the SABICH story, meanings evolve, and what most people think about a certain name, certain holiday, certain ritual, it could be that the origin of it is completely different. All
But
right.
importantly, is that the place we should go to for the best sabich?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, and I wanted to add, so now that we know the origin of the story of Sabich, it's like this guy. Who is this guy? The Earl of
Sandwich.
Sandwich.
So it's the Hebrew version of the Earl of Sandwich, right? A food named after a guy. Okay. So now I thought that's just to kind of give you a more concrete, something more that we can identify with when we talk about how the meanings of holidays evolve. And so maybe the biblical was agricultural, and then later on, much later on, hundreds of years later, it became we put into it the meaning of the Torah study, the Ten Commandments, etc. But now let's go back to Rabbi Foreman. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes with a very interesting theory that he proposes. So the question that I want to ask you, that he can ask in the video, where else do we have counting 7 times 7? Okay, that's the Omer, and then 50. Where else, in addition to the Omer counting and Shavuot, do we have this?
Shemitah and Jubilee year.
Jubilee year. Jubilee.
Excellent, excellent. So he is going to address that. So I'm going to let him take it from there.
Okay, so in trying to figure out the essence of Shavuot, holiday, the natural place to start would be the biblical verses that describe it. So let's try one on for Shabbatot Nimot Yovel year, where it's really time. Moreover, look at how else does the Torah ask you to count units of time for yourself. And it's not just any count that we're being asked to make here. It's a 7 times 7 count, 7 times 7 days that we're supposed to count. When else are we asked to count 7 times 7 units of time? Moreover, look at how the Torah characterizes the 7-day unit here, which was Shabbat, in the words of the verse, Sheva Shabbatot, remember? When else are we supposed to count 7 Sabbaths until you get to a 50th? Well, you might have guessed by now the other event that I'm talking about, Yovel, the Jubilee year in English. All of the stuff associated with Shavuot over here is associated with Yovel too, down to the precise language of the text, which I'll show you in just a minute. The only difference really is whether you're counting days or years. Let me give you the background. Here's what I'm talking about. Okay, so the Torah says when you get to the land of Israel, you start counting years. Every 7th year is known as the Shemitah, or sabbatical year. And during Shemitah, outstanding debts are canceled and the land rests. It lies fallow and unharvested, and all the fruit is available for the picking by anyone, not just the owners of that particular field. So the Torah tells us that not only are we meant to count years until we reach 7, at which time we are also meant to proclaim a Sabbath year, but the Torah also tells us that we're supposed to count these Sabbaths, these 7-year units, and every 7 of those, in other words, after every 49 years in total, well, the very next year after that, the 50th, we're meant to proclaim a Yovel year, or a Jubilee year. On the Yovel year, just like the Shemitah year, fruits are available for picking by anyone. The land can't be tilled or harvested by the owner, but in addition to all that, 2 more crucial things happen. Servants are automatically set free from their masters, In the words of the text, they return to their families. And land returns to its original ancestral owner, which is to say, land in Israel was apportioned to tribes and to families within those tribes as an inheritance. So if you were someone who possessed a certain plot of ancestral land, you could sell part or you could sell all of it, but on the Yovel year, that land would go back to you. Okay, so that's your quick background on Yovel, and let's just kind of add things up here. For Yovel, you're supposed to count 7 units of 7 years, the 7 Sabbaths according to the text, and the next one you're supposed to proclaim as Yovel. And on Shavuos, you're supposed to count 7 units of 7 days, again, 7 Sabbaths according to the text. And then the next one you're supposed to proclaim as the holiday of Shavuos. And by the way, I'm not making up how, eerie this correspondence sounds. It's right there in the verses. Listen to that language carefully, and you'll see how even the particular words the Torah picks to describe these two phenomena, Yovel and Shavuos, really seem to contain intentional echoes of one another. So with Shavuos, we had Usfartem lachem mimachras haShabbos. You should count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath. Sheva Shabbatot mimotiyena, 7 Sabbaths. And then Tisperu chamishim yom. You should count for 50 days. Now listen to the language with Yovel. Again, v'safarta lecha Sheva Shabbatot. You should count 7 Sabbaths. And then finally, v'kidashtem et shnata chamishim shana, and you should make holy this 50th year. So you hear it, it's really all the same. The safarta lecha language, the language for counting, the language of Sheva Shabbatot, the 7 Sabbaths, until the 50th. I mean, it's really all the same. The only difference is, what are you counting? Days or years? It almost seems like what Yovel is for years, Shavuos is every year. So here's the possibility I want to raise with you. Could it be that the holiday of Shavuot really is related to the idea of Yovel, the Jubilee year? And keep in mind an interesting fact. Those two sets of verses about Shavuot and about Yovel.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next video. By the way, why is the Jubilee, the Yovel, famous in American culture?
Because of the word Jubilee.
Slaves. Black America.
Yeah, what verse related to Jubilee is a famous cultural monument?
Proclaim liberty throughout the land.
Yes, excellent.
On the Liberty Bell.
Right,
On the Liberty.
exactly. Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants thereof. It's inscribed on the Liberty Bell. Why? Because it was the Jubilee year of Philadelphia. And they knew their Bible. The Christians who did that, they knew their Bible very well. And so they looked for, it was the Jubilee year, and they went to the verses that talk about Jubilee, proclaiming liberty throughout the land, and inscribed it on the Liberty Bell. So that's just a side note. So now I want to, so I think he made a convincing connection, but now, so what does it mean? What does it say about Mount Sinai being some sort of Jubilee? So we're going to see the final video now.
Let's try one on for size. Here's a verse from Leviticus, from the Sefer Vayikra, which describes Shavuos as part of a larger Parshat Hamot text. It's kind of a calendar listing of the holidays. Usfartem lachem mimachrat haShabbat, and you should count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, and that the commentaries understand.
Okay.
Actually might have had a great deal of relevance to the nation of Israel that, wandering through the desert, experienced the revelation at Sinai, and then experienced the Jericho conquest. These two things that Yovel does are expressed by the Torah in the following sentence. Ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha.
This is the verse on the Liberty Bell.
Freedom throughout the land. Yovel hiti alachem. It's a Yovel year for you. V'shavtem ish el achuzato. And each man will return to his ancestral plot. V'ish al mishpachto tashuvu. And people will return to their families. Slaves, that is. They'll return to their families as well. Okay, so just to review, the Torah says that land goes back to its primary owner and slaves are released. Do you see how those two things might have been more than idle curiosities for the Israelites on their journey through the desert? Let's first talk about land. The Israelites were about to conquer the land of Canaan, but in a deep way, they weren't really conquering it. They weren't occupying someone else's land. There was a Yovel event that was going on simultaneously with the conquest. The land had been promised as an ancestral holding to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our forefathers who had lived in this land long ago and had been promised it. That land was now returning to its rightful place as the inheritance of the children of Israel. The 7 circuits of the people on the 7 days, and the 7 circuits on the 7th day, it was like the 7 times 7 circuits of time that comprised the 49 years of the Yovel cycle. So when the shofar blast sounded at Jericho, it really was the shofar of Yovel. And as a consequence, the walls of Jericho were going to come tumbling down. It wasn't a coincidence that the walls came tumbling down, that this, of all things, was the mode by which Israel would take possession of Jericho. It would happen through the walls coming down because walls signify ownership. The Canaanite walls would evaporate because their hold on the land, not just their physical control of the land, but their legal control, their title, that was evaporating. The land of Canaan was going back to its deeper owner, the progeny of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were the ancestral holders of the land. Okay, so much for Jericho, but what about Sinai? In what way was Sinai a Yovel-like event? Well, remember that Yovel does a second thing too. It doesn't just release ancestral land back to its original owners. It also takes slaves and makes them free. Interesting, slaves. That would have been the second great imperative for the children of Israel. Freedom. Because think of these people on a journey through the desert. So yeah, at the end point of that journey, once they got to the land, then, yes, it would be important to them that the land would actually belong to them, that title would revert to them, that the land they were entering was really going to be theirs. But remember, at Sinai, they hadn't yet gotten to the land. They had just left Egypt. That was what was on their mind. And in Egypt, they were slaves. Yes, having escaped Egypt, they were no longer subjugated by cruel Egyptian masters, but is it possible that, on some level, they were also not yet completely free? In other words, could it be that an escaped slave is not the same thing as a fully free person? And if that's the case, could Sinai then have been the event that finally did free them in some ultimate way? Could Sinai have been their Yovel event, the moment at which slavery completely evaporated and became just a restless memory of times past?
So, what do you think? Could Sinai have been their Yovel event?
Interesting.
So I think that's the argument that he's making, that Sinai was a kind of Yovel for the Israelites. That's when they became completely free, and came under the into a covenant with God, and now they are, masters of their own time. Now they have to consecrate holidays and take control of their time. When they were slaves, they were not in control of their time. Even after leaving Egypt, they still had a slave mentality. Once they reached Sinai, they entered the covenant, received the Torah, then they became completely free, and so that is their sort of Yovel, their Jubilee. So that's very interesting theory of Rabbi Foreman. I think it's a nice drash. Again, I think the pshat is that we just have really 2 holidays here, coalescing: the biblical, agricultural, and then the rabbinic, talking about the Torah and Mount Sinai. But I think it was a very interesting theory from Rabbi Foreman.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking about to add to what Aaron said, I think it was genius of the rabbis to layer the whole idea of giving of the law on top of an agricultural festival, because agricultural festivals up until almost contemporaneous time were typically they were bacchanals. They were licentious kinds of situations, celebrating fertility, yada yada. And here the rabbis took something that told us, here's how you have to behave. You can't do
Mhm.
these pagan kind of things. So I just see that as utter genius.
Very interesting. I find that very compelling. And Bill wants to say something. Go ahead.
I have a very basic, fundamental explanation. What do we tend to eat on? What kind of food do we tend to eat on the two major holidays?
Meat.
Meat. But
Yeah.
you got to have income distribution. You got to support the dairy farmers.
Ah.
So you got to have one. See, this is the economist saying you got to have one holiday at least where they're going to
Very
have.
good.
Very good. Abigail just took macroeconomy, so she'll like that. Yes. All right. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.